Hello and welcome back to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am your host, Heather, and I have been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009 with the original Tudor History Podcast. So today we're going to do something a little bit different and a little bit contrarian, I suppose, which is we're going to explain Henry's perspective in executing Anne, what some possible explanations would have been for why he felt he had no other choice or why he felt he had to do it. And the reason why I'm doing this, so when I was in high school, I did this thing, this activity mock trial. This was many, many, many years ago. I don't know if they still do it. I'm sure they probably still do it. But schools around the county all were given the details of one case. And you had to prepare both the defense and the prosecution for that case. And an attorney came in and volunteered and worked with you. You put together, depositions and you did the whole work. It was like a 3-month process, right? And then at the end, you argued your case, but you didn't know in advance if you were going to be the prosecution or the defense. So you went to the courthouse in the city, and there was a panel of jurors that were other attorneys, and you argued your case in front of a judge. So you made objections when you had to make objections, which I thought was super fun. I object, Your Honor. And I got a bit trigger happy with that sometimes, I think. So yeah, enjoyed objecting. But you did all of this. And I say this for a reason, because like I said, you prepared in advance both the defense and the prosecution, and you didn't know which one you were going to be until you were there and they told you. So you had to be very prepared for both. And it really taught me a lesson in, the power in being able to understand somebody else's arguments, and being able to walk in somebody else's shoes and see the world from their perspective, and how valuable that can be in life, how valuable that can be in relationships, and how valuable that can be when you're trying to have productive discussions with people that you might not agree with. If you can get to a point, and this is something I say in the beginning of my podcast, that I study history and I love history because I think it's a way of, what do I say? I make history accessible because I believe it's a pathway to understanding who we are, our place in the universe, and being much more deeply in touch with our own humanity. And I think that's true. And I think I've said this before when people have asked me, why do I care about history and what's the point? If we can actually make these arguments from a space of 500 years where there's not maybe the pull, the emotional pull that there is for things today, but if we can actually make Henry VIII's case for him, if we can actually see what he might have been thinking and get his justification for an act that I think most of us believe is pretty abhorrent and pretty terrible. But if we can get in his brain and say, okay, this is what was going on, and we can understand that, there might be a power in being able to do that for people that we don't necessarily agree with today. And it's right after the election, and Thanksgiving dinners are coming up, and holiday dinners, and I can imagine a lot of tension might be going on for people with family members and things like that right now. So I put this out there as a potential exercise that you might want to take on in being able to articulate and understand an argument that you might yourself personally believe is abhorrent. Being able to understand it, being able to really get the perspective of the person, and where that might give you a place to stand if it's somebody that you're in a relationship with, if it's a parent or a friend or a coworker. It might be able to give you a place to stand when you're talking to them that might make the relationship a little bit more productive and nicer. And it doesn't mean, I think one thing people say is oh, well, if you make this argument, it means that's your new belief, or that's what you're going to think from here on out. No, it doesn't mean that at all. If you can articulate an argument, I'm going to give you 6 examples or 6 reasons why I think Henry had to make the choice that he had to make, or what might have been going through his mind when he made that choice. I still think what he did to Anne Boleyn was absolutely terrible. But if you can look at this and say, okay, here's what he was thinking, maybe, just maybe, you might be able to look at a relative or a friend or a spouse or something like that who might have different political beliefs than you do, or different religious beliefs, or, there's a lot of things that people disagree on. There's a lot of things people disagree on these days. And that's not going to stop anytime soon, I don't think. But if we can start to understand for real where those other people are coming from that don't necessarily share our beliefs, I think it gives us a power in being able to talk to them, and it can save relationships, and it can, save families, and gosh darn it, it can save your Thanksgiving dinner, right? So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about why Henry made the choice that he made. So I actually want to say this comes from, there was a book about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, called The Creation of Anne Boleyn by Susan Bordeaux. And it looked at like how Anne has been created in media, how the story of Anne has changed over the years. I actually read it. It has a very special place in my heart because I read it when my daughter was first born. And my daughter was born in August, and it was that autumn I was reading it. And I remember very clearly that reading it when I was half asleep in the middle of the night, getting up for feedings, because she was like a month old. She was eating every 2 hours or whatever. And I have such clear memories, very vivid memories of reading this book. I actually read it on a service called Oyster, which was like today's Everend, which is like Spotify for books. Um, the Oyster was this very early service that was Spotify for books. And so I read The Creation of Anne Boleyn on Oyster in the autumn of 2013 when I would be nursing Hannah, 2 o'clock in the morning. But Susan Bordeaux, I had actually invited her to be on my podcast, but my podcast then was not as big as it is now. And she declined. This was, 2013 when I first invited her. But anyway, maybe she'd like to come on now. I don't know. But on her blog, she had an article that outlined 6 different historians and their takes on why Henry made the choices that he made. So we're going to talk about those. We're going to see if any of them resonate for you. If you can put yourself in Henry's shoes, this is an exercise in empathy, an exercise in understanding people who are very different from us, and an exercise in understanding people that we might think are kind of monsters, and seeing why they made the decisions that they made so that we can more deeply understand ourselves and what we believe and what we stand for and how to make the arguments against them. How's that? It's got real deep real quick, you guys. Real deep real quick. So, empathy through discussing Henry and Henry's choices. So, idea number 1 comes from Susanna Lipscomb, who had argued that Henry's response was a reaction to having been deeply wounded, his wounded honor, and the need to restore his patriarchal authority. Allegations of Anne's infidelity damaged Henry's masculinity. His male honor was tied to controlling a woman's morality. Public accusations and mockery around Anne's supposed actions, combined with his need to reassert his dominance, pushed Henry to take drastic measures. So let's break that down. I just shook my table. Back in the 16th century, a man whose wife cheated on him, was cuckolded, right, was seen as not really a full man, right? He didn't have the necessary qualities to keep his wife happy, keep his wife in line, keep his wife faithful. If he didn't have those qualities, how on earth could he be king? How could he send armies to war? How could he decide taxes? How could he do all of that if he couldn't even manage to keep his wife faithful? And so the idea is that Henry had to do something quite drastic, assert a massive amount of masculinity and dominance into the conversation to show that, look, he actually was fully in control. If he was in a position where he could allow himself to be made a fool of by Anne, what would that have done for his kingship? What would that have done for the monarchy in general? Would it have weakened the monarchy? Would it have weakened him as a king? What could he have done to show that he was fully in control? Could he have sent her to a nunnery? Could he have really said, look, You can cheat on the king. You can perhaps even put the, what's the word? The succession. Put the succession at stake if you got pregnant by somebody who wasn't me. You can do all of that. You can make fun of me. You can make fun of the crown. You can make fun of this institution, which is bigger than me. You can do all that and still live and go to a nunnery where perhaps you might continue this behavior, where perhaps you will still continue to make fun of me. Who knows? I don't know. I mean, it's one thing to think about. What would Henry, what, as putting yourself in the position of a 16th century man who was the king, who was in charge of everything, who had just declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England, who had broke from Rome to be able to marry this woman who promised you a son, didn't deliver. Now she's potentially cheating on you, makes you look like a fool in front of your friends, in front of your enemies, in front of other countries, in front of the Pope, all of that. What are you going to do? Cheating on the king and potentially messing with the succession has been treason, right? That was considered treason because you could have a king who's not really of the right bloodline. What are you going to do? What should he have done? I don't know, but that is one way of looking at it. It's one way of thinking that maybe execution was an option. Now, Alison Weir suggested that Henry was eager to believe the worst about Anne, viewing her as a monstrous figure. Her alleged actions, including the rumored plots against him, and that was another thing, the plots against him, seemed to validate his fears. This perception was enough to justify his decision to execute her, as he viewed her as a threat to his life and the stability of his reign. Again, you're out there plotting against the king. People who plot against the king generally do not live very long at that time. In terms of him being willing to believe the absolute worst about her, that could also go back to the damaged ego, right? The accusations were so crazy, so damaging, so messed up. Like, on one hand, you might say, okay, could you have really, really believed that of her? Surely you know her better than that. Surely you know that she wouldn't do that. But how does he know that? Again, looking at it from his perspective, this is a woman who, once you start to see these things, right? It's one of these things where when you look for things, when you look for evidence of things, you start to see it. Just like, when you're pregnant, you start to see pregnant people everywhere. When you buy a yellow car and you start to see yellow cars everywhere. If you decide something, you will then find evidence for it. Try it out today. Try it out for fun. Make up your mind about something, decide something, and then look for the evidence. And I guarantee you're going to start to see the evidence for it everywhere. So there's a couple ways you can do that whole finding evidence thing. You can make up your mind that like you're really awesome and the world is really awesome and the world is full of awesome people doing awesome things. And if you actually make up your mind about that and start to look for evidence of that, you will find that, I promise. And it also works in a less empowering way, which is if you look for evidence that the world is out to get you, you are probably going to find that evidence. So by this point, Henry had decided that Anne was no good. She had potentially tricked him into marrying him. And she had played all these games to get him to divorce his wife for her, to leave the church, all of this promising him a son, not delivering on the son. And how do we know that she wouldn't? How does he know that she wouldn't actually do these things? It's one of those things where you say, like, do I really know this person? Do I really know her? So I don't know. I can imagine a world in which Henry thinks, like, actually, really, I'm really lucky I got away from that. It's really lucky. And there's actually stories about how he was very worried about his son, Henry Fitzroy. And he, was very concerned that Anne was going to try and do something to his children. And Anne had made remarks about hurting Mary. And so, once you've made up your mind that Anne is a bad person, you can go back and find evidence to support that and find things that she did in the past to support your thought. So, there's the idea that Henry really believed that he had been threatened and she was plotting against him. And again, plotting against the king never works out well, no matter who you are. G.W. Barnard said that Henry may have genuinely believed Anne's guilt because of accusations from trusted individuals like the Countess of Worcester. Though evidence was weak, Henry's belief in Anne's infidelity and betrayal, particularly her flirtations and ambiguous interactions was enough for him to feel justified in her executions. And I'm going to read here from the article. Also, just possible, of course, is that everything we've considered was no more than a series of misunderstandings in response to, quote, unguarded speech and gossip. A lot of smoke, but precious little fire. After Anne in the Tower told Kingston about Mark Smeaton, her mother rebuked her. Such desire as you have had to such tales has brought you to this. It's just about possible that the Countess of Worcester had herself read too much into what she thought she had seen, not just in the case of Anne's brother, but of all she spoke of it. It's just about possible that Anne's burblings in the Tower could be innocently explained away, but crucially, what Henry learned was amply sufficient to make him, reluctantly but reasonably, conclude that, alas, it was all true, and then seek furiously to deal with those who had wronged him. Henry didn't just magically turn into this person who would execute people who acted against him. Look at what he did to Empson and Dudley, who had been his father's trusted servants. He, right away, early on in his reign, before anybody started talking about his jousting accident or potential blood poisoning or anything like that, he showed that he was willing to execute people. Look at what he did to the Duke of Buckingham. I've done episodes on that. Henry had clearly been somebody that you did not mess with. He made it very clear from the very beginning of his reign that he would deal very harshly with anybody who was messing with him and anybody who threatened him. So again, if he thinks that he's being messed with, he's going to react harshly. Now, the next point, Michael Hurst views Henry's decision as rooted in disillusionment with Anne's failure to produce a male heir. This failure shattered his hopes and led him to question whether his life choices, including his split from the Catholic Church, had been a mistake. This psychological crisis turned Henry into a more ruthless and unyielding figure, contributing to Anne's downfall. You can say she led him through, 7 years of promising that she would give him a son, and he moved mountains for her, and he left the church. He had got himself excommunicated. All of that, made himself a pariah of the three big Catholic countries, Spain and Italy and France, and all of these different countries were now all out to get him. And he did that for Anne and a male heir. And then she gets pregnant right away, which must have been such a sign from God. Oh my gosh, look, as soon as we get married, Anne's pregnant. This is amazing. And then it's a girl. And then it's an Elizabeth. Are you kidding me? But are you for real kidding me? It must have been him. I can't even imagine, what his conversation with God must have been. You're joking, right? You're seriously joking. This is a joke. And then she loses children. She has miscarriages, just like Catherine of Aragon had done. And in this time when everything was blamed on the woman, now we know, of course, the men are the ones who decide if it's a boy or a girl, but they did not know that then. So, this really probably led him to really seriously question his life choices, to really seriously question what he was doing. And when you get to that point, then it's are you kidding me? And now you're cheating on me. And now you're potentially plotting against me. What else was he going to do, right? What else was he going to do? So another one, Kyra Kramer presents a theory that Henry suffered from a genetic disorder, potentially McLeod syndrome, which would have impacted his mental state, leading to increased paranoia and erratic behavior. This disorder could explain his radical shift in personality and his seemingly irrational actions toward Anne, as his mental deterioration made him more susceptible to manipulation by her enemies. And of course, we do start to see that later in the plots with how he treated Cromwell, first raising him up, making him the Earl of Essex, and then executing him, in how we saw him treat with Catherine Parr, where he was ready to believe all of this terrible stuff about Catherine Parr. So, maybe he did have some kind of mental health issue. Maybe he did have some kind of genetic disorder that made him especially paranoid. Give somebody like that power, give somebody like that the ability to execute somebody and control the legal system and all of that without any kind of balances or checks on their power. And that is not going to end well for anybody who winds up on their bad side. Then, final one, Susan Bordeaux, who wrote this book, The Creation of Anne Boleyn, argues that Henry's inherently capricious personality, with extreme swings between affection and brutality, defined his treatment of Anne and others. His relationships were all or nothing, meaning close allies or lovers could quickly become enemies. His inflated sense of authority, combined with unpredictable temper, made it dangerous for anyone to disappoint him, leading to Anne's execution when her actions or mere existence no longer served his interests. Again, we saw that with Empson and Dudley early on, that he was so quick to execute them, to make a point that he was not his father and things were going to change. We saw with the way he treated Wolsey, assuring Wolsey that things were all good when they really weren't. We saw with the way he handled the Pilgrimage of Grace, bringing the people at Christmas time and saying, "Oh, it's all good. Talk to me about your issues," and, then executing them all. Henry definitely had that side to him. When you're dealing with anybody who might have a side to them like that, if you want to stay alive, you probably should go as far away from them as you possibly can. So getting involved with them in the first place is a pretty icky idea, pretty dangerous idea. And then once you are involved with them and you don't have any other options, definitely doing anything flirtatious, doing anything that could be deemed at all inappropriate, at all a threat, is something that you would likely want to stay clear of. So I don't know. There's 6 ideas of why Henry did what he did. If you can put yourself in the position of Henry, who is feeling this paranoia, who is seeing war coming at him from France, from Spain, from the Pope excommunicating him and giving permission to other powers to invade him, you can see the idea, the whispers from people that your wife was plotting against you with these men that she cheated on you with after you did so much for her. If you can actually really start to see his position dealing with potentially mental health issues that made him much more paranoid. We will conclude this Heather's lessons in empathy and seeing things from different perspectives, even when you don't agree with them, and understanding that it's okay to understand different perspectives. Doesn't mean you agree with them, but you can still love the people who have those perspectives. All right. If you liked this video, if you enjoyed watching it, if you enjoyed the thought exercise of trying to imagine Henry's case, maybe try it on Cromwell's case, maybe try it on maybe try it on other people who have done maybe try it on Mary the First. I don't like how she's always called Bloody Mary. Anyway, you can try it on all kinds of villains in history and see what happens. And then try it on the people at your Thanksgiving table. And you might have a much nicer Thanksgiving. And you're welcome in advance for that. All right, my friends, thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this, I sure would appreciate a press of that like button. You know what it does. It feeds the algorithm and helps to get our content to way more people. And I hope I earned your subscription to my channel, where I put out videos like this on the regular. They aren't always related to arguing contrarian points of view. Sometimes they are. All right, I will be back again very soon. And in the meantime, be well. Know that you are deeply loved. I'm so glad I shared the planet with you. And don't forget to drink your water. Very important to stay hydrated. Stay hydrated, my friends. All right, I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.